Hello, everyone. Oh, I'm glitching. Weird. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm Kris. This is Andrew Jackson, the 8-year reign of terror documentary. I'm gonna cough. All right, I feel better. This is part 3. You're saying, "Hey, Kris, I didn't watch the first two, so why are you doing this?" Which is odd that you would ask me this on the third one, because the first and second I explain why. It's Wednesday today. This video will be out Friday. And Saturday morning, I will be making the committed drive to visit the Hermitage. This will be my second visit. I'm going with my nephew. I'm going to record some videos, doing the VIP tour at 10 a.m. And it's a 2-hour tour. And then I will be hopefully making some videos, doing some shorts. And Andrew Jackson was one of the people who wasn't able to do anything last year. There were reasons. But in 23, I had asked which president you wanted me to visit, and I think Jackson was number 2, Lincoln was number 1. So I will definitely get to there this year for sure. I'm going to try to get to another one somewhat nearby so I can do a day trip. But yeah, so Andrew Jackson is a fascinating person, kind of insane. No, kinda. He was insane. So let's go ahead and get into this before we get started. And click on that thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, helps me out. If you want to sponsor a video, click on that thanks button, donate to the channel, request a video. There you go. You can still request without donating, just takes a little more time. All right? Video.
Years. In the decade since the Panic of 1819, the country was split over whether to increase or reduce tariffs. The Northerners and Westerners broadly supported increasing the tariff to protect and nurture American industries, but the Southerners favored lowering the tariff to access cheaper imports. While Jackson sympathized with the South and the cause of free trade, he also saw tariffs as a way of raising revenue for the government to pay down its debt. He also addressed Native American affairs, referring to an ongoing controversy in which the Cherokees and Creeks claimed to be exempt from state laws in Georgia and Alabama, and appealed to the president for protection. Jackson refused their appeal and proposed granting land west of the Mississippi to those Native Americans who wished to retain tribal autonomy, but the ones who stayed would have to obey state laws. Ongoing tensions over tariff reform and the fallout from the Petticoat Affair contributed to an ever-widening rift between Jackson and Vice President Calhoun. The passage of the Tariff of 1828 during the Adams administration led to the publication of an anonymous report in December 1828 under the title South Carolina Exposition and Protest. The author argued that while the Constitution gave the federal government the power to levy a tariff to collect revenue, this did not mean it could do so in order to protect domestic industries. After claiming that the tariff had been imposed by an unchecked majority in the North against the interests of the South, he quoted the 10th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which stated that all powers not specifically delegated to the federal government are expressly reserved to the states and the people, and thus states could veto or nullify actions of the federal government they deemed unconstitutional. Despite his attempts to remain anonymous, the author of this bombshell report was none other than Vice President Calhoun. The debates that followed on tariff reform inspired one of the most memorable exchanges during Jackson's presidency. On the 13th of April 1830, Jackson and Calhoun were present at a celebration of the late Jefferson's birthday.
The setup for this was Henry Clay there? We're going to find out. But everyone who was there, I shouldn't say everyone, most of the people who were there were kind of in cahoots, and they were all going to be doing these toasts, and they'll get into it. But Jackson learned pretty quickly that he had walked into a ambush. And this is a man who didn't like things that were unexpected or hostile to him. You know, he saw things with the pew pew. So, yeah.
The day before, Jackson read the list of toasters from the dinner's program and concluded that they were all nullifiers. After the 24 scheduled toasts praising nullification, Jackson responded defiantly, "Our federal union, it must be preserved." Calhoun was next to speak and responded, "The Union, next to our liberty, the most dear." The Vice President's failure to acknowledge the Union's supremacy further alienated him from Jackson.
I said in the first video, I think it was the first video, maybe it's the second video, that was yesterday. So many things have happened since yesterday, right? Can't get into them. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre murders and all that stuff, whatever. I said that he had visited Madison and he had a talk with him. This is what the talk was about. It was about, can the states nullify and stuff like that. I was getting my years mixed up, but he did sit down with Madison. Madison, I don't think cared for him, but had an appreciation for him. Madison, his later years, didn't care for him because, I mean, he showed himself to be a military, do what I want to do kind of guy. But he realized that he did care about the Constitution. Sorry, I'm popping these peas. He did care about the Constitution. And he wanted to make sure that what he was doing was federally correct and not just kind of, and I hate to say this, shooting from the hip. He wanted to really, because it's him and he duels. So, okay, back to the video.
Agreements between the two men split the cabinet, and in 1831, Jackson persuaded them all to step aside, including his allies. Eaton returned to the Senate, while Van Buren was dispatched to London as ambassador with a promise of the vice presidential candidacy in 1832. Throughout his life, President Jackson was suspicious towards banks and financial institutions, blaming them for the boom and bust cycles which caused unfortunate citizens to fall into debt and ruin. The Bank of the United States' handling of the economic crisis of 1819 seemed to confirm this view. The bank's charter...
Wait a minute.
1819 seemed to confirm...
What building is that? The first thing I thought of was it was the Confederate White House, but that is not the Confederate White House. That's what, I apologize. I was thinking that was the Confederate White House, and I was like, why is that in here? There's no reason for it to be in here yet. It's not even supposed to exist yet. They've been planning this for a while.
Confirm this view. The bank's charter was up for renewal in 1836, but in 1831, Henry Clay advised Bank President Nicholas Biddle to seek a renewal of the charter. Clay anticipated that Congress would approve the renewal and challenged Jackson to veto it. Clay had been nominated as the presidential candidate for the National Republican Party for the 1832 election and wanted to fight the election as a referendum on the future of the bank. Daniel Webster also persuaded Biddle to seek an early renewal, fearing that there wouldn't be enough votes in Congress if Jackson and his Democrats were to win easily. After Biddle submitted the application in early 1832, Webster underlined the necessity of the bank as the issuer of a national currency. Opponents of the bank, such as Thomas Benton, proposed doing away with banks and paper money altogether and recognizing gold and silver coinage as the only legal tender. After the charter's renewal passed both houses, Jackson issued his anticipated veto on constitutional grounds. Yet, despite protests at the despotism of King Andrew I, Jackson and Van Buren were elected president and vice president by a margin of 219 to 49 electoral votes.
I'm mixed on the bank issue, but Nicholas Biddle, I won't get into it yet.
While the tariff and secession crisis was new, the disputes over Native American land were all too familiar. During Jackson's presidency, the issue of the Native Americans east of the River Mississippi became prominent. Although the Cherokees in Georgia had attempted to assimilate with their white neighbors by adopting a writing system for their language and joined them as farmers and traders, this did not prevent the Georgia legislature from passing punitive laws in an attempt to force them to move west. Jackson continued to believe that there was no practical means of stopping white settlers from encroaching on Native American lands, and the best way to prevent bloodshed was for the tribes to move west of the Mississippi, which in turn would open up land for white settlement. As a result, in 1830, he introduced the Indian Removal Act, which allowed the federal government to exchange Native American land east of the Mississippi for new lands to the west. In 1831, the Choctaws had agreed to do so, but poor weather and unfamiliar terrain caused thousands to perish in what was described by a Choctaw chief as a Trail of Tears, a name that has stuck ever since to describe the appalling relocation policies of the 1830s.
When I went down to Tennessee, and I went down to, in 2019, I went down to James K. Polk's ancestral home in Columbia, Tennessee, or is it Columbus, Tennessee? I don't remember. It's one of them. And then I went down to Battlefield Shiloh, and then drove across and went to Chattanooga, got a hotel so I could go down to Chickamauga. And I kept driving by signs, the Trail of Tears. And so they have the road marked where this is the path that they took. And you'd see those signs and you were like, wow. Just kind of, it just kind of showed the path, so to speak. I mean, it's a road, it's roads now, but the path was there, and it was just like, wow, a couple hundred years ago, this is just packed with natives, and kind of made you think.
Nevertheless, in a message to Congress in February 1832, Jackson called on other Native American tribes to follow the example of the Choctaws, adding that, quote, "the complete execution of the plan of removal of the Indians should be made without further delay." As Jackson approached the end of his second term, the unrenewed charter of the Bank of the United States was set to expire. Nicholas Biddle, the president of the Bank of the United States, still expected the bank to receive its charter at the last minute, since to do otherwise would risk an economic crisis. After advice from Attorney General Roger Taney back in June 1833, Jackson had decided to withdraw Treasury deposits from the National Bank and instead deposit them in smaller state banks.
Real fast, Roger Taney became the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and ruled on the Dred Scott case against the slave that had been in an area that there were free slaves, and like the rule was that if you were there for so long, then you became free because you were living there. Something to that effect. I don't remember offhand. I'm just barely remembering it. And so he sued, and it went to the Supreme Court, and Taney basically said something to the effect of like property can't sue the owner. Something ridiculous, you know what I mean? It's like, okay. But anyways.
When Jackson's Treasury Secretary William Duane refused, Jackson dismissed him and appointed Taney as acting secretary, who carried out the transfer as planned on the 1st of October 1833. In response, Biddle tightened credit in order to strengthen the bank, but also to engineer a financial crisis as a demonstration of the bank's economic power.
And that was where I said Thomas Biddle, Nicholas Biddle. I said Biddle, and then I stopped. This is where he overplayed his hand. He thought that he was going to tighten down, cause a panic, and then make everyone look at Jackson and say, oh my goodness, what are you doing? And Jackson just kind of sat back and was like, yep, you just played yourself here. Because you showed why you don't deserve to have this power. And it wasn't just Biddle, it was other people like Calhoun and wow, names are just not coming to Henry Clay and all these other people, Daniel Webster, who were telling him, you've got to do something. You have to do something. And that was what he did. And I think in theory, it was good, cause panic, and then basically look at Jackson and say, this is what you're doing. But instead, Jackson was just like, I didn't do anything. I don't work for the bank. And it was like, that backfired.
While regional banks collapsed all over the country, Biddle mobilized his political allies in Congress, and from the Senate, Henry Clay introduced a motion of censure against Jackson for withdrawing federal deposits without congressional approval. Jackson remained steadfast in defense of his policies, and by the spring of 1834, the liquidity started flowing from the state banks back into the economy. Having defeated Biddle in the Bank Wars, on the 1st of January 1835, Jackson announced that the federal government had paid off its debts. However, as Daniel Webster had predicted a few years earlier, the state banks were empowered to issue notes beyond the country's economic capacity, creating a speculative bubble. In July 1836, Jackson belatedly tried to dampen the speculation in land by forcing purchasers to buy land in gold or silver. Land values plummeted, causing a wider economic slump, which would not be felt until 1837, when Jackson was out of office. For all his rhetoric about bankers fueling boom and bust cycles, Jackson had created one of his own with his bank policy. For a man who had made his name on the battlefield, Jackson's presidency was relatively peaceful. Instead, as President Jackson, he preferred to use diplomatic methods to achieve his foreign policy goals. He had always believed that Texas was included in the Louisiana Purchase, and in 1829 he sought to negotiate a purchase from Mexico, which had achieved independence from Spain in 1821. The Mexican government granted citizenship to Americans settling in the country, and Stephen Austin led 300 families to do so in 1825. Political instability and constant changes in the Mexican government complicated the negotiations, and Jackson refused his envoy Anthony Butler's suggestion of offering bribes to Mexican officials. Despairing over the prospects of acquiring Texas through diplomacy, Jackson turned to his protege Sam Houston, who had previously spoken of launching an expedition to Texas to conquer it for the United States. In the summer of 1832, Jackson met Houston at the Hermitage and gave him funds to travel to Texas on the pretext of investigating Native American affairs while reporting back on the sentiments of the settlers in Texas towards the Mexican government. By the early 1830s, the Mexicans were seeking to stop the flow of American immigrants into Texas and expressly banned the settlers from bringing slaves. In late 1835, some Texans, comprising both American-born and Mexican-born citizens, rose in revolt, captured San Antonio, and forced the Mexican troops to move back south of the Rio Grande. In response, Mexican President Antonio López de Santa Anna vowed vengeance and threatened to retake Texas and march all the way to Washington. By early 1836, the Mexicans had retaken San Antonio after defeating the Texans at the Battle of the Alamo. While Jackson maintained official neutrality towards Mexico, he did nothing to prevent Americans from joining the Texan rebels. Houston was now in command of rebel forces and hoped to lure the Mexicans into disputed territory, allowing General Edmund Gaines to intervene with his American army. Houston's men were less inclined to retreat, and instead the Texans defeated Santa Anna alone at the Battle of San Jacinto on the 21st of April, 1836. After being taken prisoner, Santa Anna had no choice but to recognize Texan independence. While Houston wrote to Jackson, inviting the United States to annex Texas, Jackson was not prepared to do so during a presidential election year, and only recognized the independence of the Republic of Texas on the 3rd of March, 1837, the final day of his presidency. Jackson was succeeded as president by Martin Van Buren.
I'm going to go back because I don't think it was covered. So Jackson was leaving the Capitol. That's what it was. I kept thinking Congress. He was leaving the Capitol, and guy pulls up, in his car, his Lamborghini. Walks up, I think calls his name, pulls a pistol, fires. Nothing happens. Misfires. I should have said misfired. Pulled the trigger, misfires. He drops that, pulls a second pistol, points it, pulls the trigger, it misfires. By this time, Jackson and a couple other people that are with him, one of them I will be naming, it wasn't me. Jackson snaps out of it, grabs his cane, and just starts beating this man. Somebody else, a gentleman talking about the Texas Revolt you might have heard of, Daniel Boone. Was it Daniel Boone? Now I'm questioning myself. I'm going to double check because now I'm not sure. Okay. So I had Daniel Boone on my mind. Not Daniel Boone. Daniel Boone was dead by now. Davy Crockett is who I meant to think of. And I'm just going to read. While Davy Crockett and Andrew Jackson were political allies at one point, Crockett famously helped subdue a would-be assassin, Richard Lawrence, during an attempted assassination of Jackson in 1835, though Jackson himself also played a role in the incident, and that was him beating the guy with the cane. On On January 30th, 1835, Jackson was leaving the U.S. Capitol after a state funeral when Lawrence, a crazed gunman, emerged from the crowd and fired 2 pistols at him. The misfires, both pistols misfired. A miraculous event that some believe was due to damp powder from the unusual misty weather. Jackson's reaction: Jackson reportedly responded by whacking Lawrence with his cane. Crockett's role: Crockett, along with other bystanders, helped disarm and subdue Lawrence. Despite this incident, Crockett and Jackson would eventually have political differences, with Crockett becoming a Whig and opposing Jackson's policies. Now, I believe, and I'm going to double check this, that was 1835. Davy Crockett died in 1836. So less than a year later from that, him helping save the life of the president, he was killed at the Battle of the Alamo. So there you go.
Who vowed to continue his predecessor's policies. The 7.
And by the way, Martin Van Buren, I don't know much about other than he was president when most of the Indian Removal Act policy took place, which was Jackson's policy. But he was the president when, if you've seen the movie The Amistad, great movie, terrible movie, sad movie. He was the president when that was happening.
20-year-old Jackson returned to the Hermitage in Tennessee. Despite Jackson's successes, the estate was poorly run and in debt, as a result of it being mismanaged by the former president's adopted son, Andrew Jackson Jr. During his retirement, Jackson continued to take an interest in political issues that Van Buren inherited from him, writing to the new president a couple of times a month with advice. After the expiry of the charter of the Bank of the United States, Biddle had the bank reincorporated in Pennsylvania and induced the state banks to restrict credit during the Panic of 1837, which had been set off by Jackson's bursting of the land bubble. In late 1838, Jackson's solution to the Cherokee dispute with Georgia was implemented, as 13,000 Cherokees were removed to Oklahoma by an armed force led by Winfield Scott, 4,000 of whom perished during this most violent episode in the Trail of Tears and the Native American removals of the 1830s that Jackson was the architect of. Elsewhere, Jackson's assertive presidency had won him many enemies who coalesced to form the Whig Party. In the election of 1840, Van Buren was defeated by the Whig candidate General William Henry Harrison, who took a page from Jackson's book by running a campaign on his war record. When Harrison died of pneumonia after just a month in office, his vice president, John Tyler, succeeded to the office, surprising the Whigs by vetoing a new charter for a national bank.
I want to go back 10 seconds. 1790 to 1862. I've been to his grave. He's buried near James Monroe at Hollywood Cemetery in Richmond, Virginia. Also buried there is General George Pickett, Pickett's Charge, Gettysburg, and the other famous is what the hell's your name, man? Jefferson Davis. I knew that the whole time. I got side note. Pause. All right, unpause. Has nothing to do with the video. I understand. I got a couple of books here, Confederate Government, Volume 1 and Volume 2, and they were written by Jefferson Davis. Have not read them. I got them when I visited his birth home. I was not reading. Yep. But John Tyler, that's who I'm going to talk about. 1790 to 1862. And as of 2021, he had a grandson that died. a grandson. 2021. A grandson. That would be him. Then he had a son. And that guy, I phased. I'm back on Earth. He had himself. Him, his grandson. Him, his son, and then his son had a son, which would be his grandson. Do you understand? Do you comprehend this? That would be, we're talking 138 years. 38 years takes you to 1900. Then another 100, that's 138, plus 21. We're talking about 159. 159 years later, and his grandson is still around. And you're just like, how? He was in his 70s. I think he was 70 when he had his son. I mean, the man didn't stop. And then the son was in his 70s when he had his last son. So he had two grandsons. I want to say they both have to be gone now. But one died in 2021. And I want to say the other one potentially could be alive, or that one did already die. I don't know. But that's crazy.
Vice President John Tyler succeeded to the office, surprising the Whigs by vetoing a new charter for a national bank. In the early 1840s, Jackson exchanged several letters with Sam Houston about the future of Texas. As President of the Texas Republic, Houston informed his mentor that he still hoped to join the United States, but in the event the United States refused to accept Texas as a state, the Texans could expand westwards to the Pacific and cultivate an economic relationship with the British to the north in Canada and northwestwards, where they had a claim to modern-day Oregon and Washington state. Having received the hint that an independent Texas may be prepared to establish close ties with the British, Jackson lobbied Congress for the annexation of Texas. He was also in favor of full recognition of American sovereignty in the Oregon Territory, which was at the time jointly occupied by Britain and the United States. With Texas as the key issue of the 1844 campaign, Henry Clay won the Whig nomination opposing annexation. Van Buren remained the favorite for the Democratic nomination, but when Jackson attacked him for refusing to support annexation, former Congressman and Tennessee Governor James K. Polk emerged as the dark horse candidate and won the subsequent election, promising to annex Texas and Oregon.
Real fast, James K. Polk, very underrated president, died shortly after he left office. He's a workaholic, but he set out for four things. He accomplished all four. But the annexation of Texas, surprise, John Tyler did that before he left office. John Tyler did it because Democrats did it. So John Tyler's own party kicked him out, as it was. I don't know if that was said, but they kicked him out. He refused to go along with just like Whig policies. He wanted to go along with what the people wanted. So he refused anything like that. When he got kicked out of the party, Jackson started getting in his ear from writing to him from the Hermitage, and it was just like, hey, look, Democrats are willing to work with you. Democrats are willing to work with you. You know, you have no problem. So he started working with Democrats, passing policies, and stupid dog. And when he started kicking around the old re-election thought, Jackson was like, the Whigs don't want you. He's like, I think maybe I'll become a Democrat. And Jackson was like, yeah, no, that's not going to happen. You're not good. Meanwhile, for the past 3 years, Jackson's been in his ear like, you're the man. You're the man. Come on, bump fists. There you go. You're the man. And then John Tyler's like, I'm going to do it again. We're going to bump? And Jackson's like, yeah, no, we're not going to bump. No. Democrats don't want you. You're terrible. You turned your own party against you. Why would we want you? And it was just like, oh, that's politics, my friend. You just got stabbed repeatedly and you didn't even know it. So his final desperate move was to annex Texas, hoping that would get attention. But by then, Jackson had done everything he could to get Polk in the position to be elected, but everything didn't work. And then finally, Jackson was just like, look, get married to this woman. Her name wasn't Rachel. Maybe it was. Who the hell cares? He's like, marry her because she's going to bring out people that will turn to like you. And just who cares? Just give it a try. Also, side note, James K. Polk is the reason. Well, his wife is the reason. You know what? I got to look up her name. I want to say it's Rachel, but that's not right. Okay, Sarah Childress Polk. And why I out of respect, got her name is because whenever they would have parties, Polk would come in and just stand in the corner. He was a little guy, but he was just not one of those people who wanted to mingle. His brain was always churning. It was just one of those guys that like, hey, how are you? It was just too much for him. He was in the corner thinking, okay, I got to do this. I got to do this. I want to do this. How do I achieve this? Who do I have to talk to? If you were somebody that he needed to communicate with, he would beeline right to you, shake your hand, talk to you, and then leave. He was not one of those people. He was socially awkward. His wife wanted him to be respected. When he came into the room, people didn't care. So she wanted a song played every time he entered the room. Hail to the chief. Now that plays every time a president enters the room.
President Tyler, after accomplishing little in office, decided to introduce a joint resolution of the House and Senate to approve the annexation of Texas. Tyler signed the annexation bill on the 1st of March, 1845, 3 days before the end of his term, and Texas gained statehood on the 29th of December. By then, Andrew Jackson was already dead, having passed away at the Hermitage on the 8th of June, 1845, at the age of 78. Andrew Jackson left behind a legacy as one of the most controversial presidents in American history.
That's a picture, a real picture of him late in his life. I don't know if you know that. He's not like 17 there. But he is the second president to be photographed. The first one was John Quincy Adams.
Legacy as one of the most controversial presidents in American history. A precocious individual, he fought in the American Revolutionary War and became a trained lawyer before he was 20 years of age. His first major role in American life was in the formation of the state of Tennessee, and while he hailed originally from the Carolinas, he is perhaps Tennessee's most famous son in many respects. Jackson's subsequent role in American life was forged through his military career, becoming a hero of the War of 1812 and also playing a major part in the wars against the Creek, Seminole, and other Native American groups in the 1810s. He was robbed of the White House in 1824 through a corrupt bargain between John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay. Thereafter, efforts to win him the 1828 U.S. presidential election led to the formation of the Democratic Party. Having won that election, his 8 years as president were controversial. Scandals like the Petticoat Affair and the clashes in Congress over the National Bank, tariffs, and secession dominated his time in the White House. But in retrospect, his passage of the Indian Removal Act in 1830 and the quasi-genocidal trail of tears that followed seem the gravest black spot on Jackson's legacy, along with his failure to engage in any constructive way with the slavery issue. Despite all of this, There is no denying Jackson's importance in the history of the United States in the 19th century. He played a crucial role in southwestern expansion, and then, as president, dominated the country's politics for 2 decades, such that many scholars define the second-party system which existed between the mid-1820s and the mid-1850s as effectively being a clash between Jacksonians and anti-Jacksonians. He might not have been a particularly good president, but he was an immensely significant one. What do you think of Andrew Jackson? Was he an American hero and champion of states' rights and manifest destiny? Or was he a dangerous populist who engaged in ethnic cleansing while destabilizing the country through his reckless domestic agenda? Please, let us know in the comments section. And in the meantime, thank you very much for watching.
Jackson's life fascinates me. His life fascinates me, but I'm not a fan of his presidency. On a side note, one of Trump's favorite presidents is Jackson. Before I went there in 2017, just about 3 weeks before I went there, Trump was there and he'd visited the Hermitage. And when you go to the Hermitage in his office area, he had this little thing made up of all these newspaper articles. He'd get newspapers every day, and he would write in the margins just to counter what they were saying. And Trump read that and saw some of it, and he goes, "See, he fights with the media too." I got a kick out of that. Let me play the rest. And I think he was both. Significant, good, bad. He paid down the debt. Paid the debt off. But he was a military guy who tried to run it like a military in some aspects. I don't know. I'm hot and cold on him, but his life fascinates me. I have a 3-part volume from. Give me a second. Okay, so there's I wish you could see it. There you go. It's Andrew Jackson, Volume 1, The Course of American Empire, 1767 to 1821, and it's by Robert V. Remini, Remini. But, Jackson, stop. But that's Volume 1. And here's Volume 2 and 3. Here's 1. 2 and 3. Same guy. But I've read Volume 1. There you go. It's like 1,800 pages. I've read Volume 1, and then I took a break, and I was going to get into 2 sometime later, and then I didn't, so I reread Volume 1, and then I never got into 2. So I still have 2 and 3 to read, and I've read 1 twice. So don't do that. Just go ahead and, read the other ones. And then John Meacham's American Lion, I've read. I will not. It's good. It's good. It's fast. You want a good book? Andrew Jackson by H.W. Brands. Yes. A little bit longer. It's 550 pages. Then I got this when I visited. This is The First Populist. The Defiant Life of Andrew Jackson by David S. Brown. Have not read it. Oddly enough, I got that at from First Populous. Oh, I think I ordered that. Yes. And then I have President Andrew Jackson, Cherokee Chief John Ross, and A Great American Land Grab, Jackson Land. Got this from, which one was it? This was, sorry, why am I glitching? I'm glitching now. Got that one from Harry Truman's library. Avenging the People, Andrew Jackson, The Rule of Law, and the American Nation. I have not read that one or the last one. And then this was Harry Truman's favorite book, which I have not read. And this is The Age of Jackson. And apparently, he would go out on vacation and he would read this book, which is like 500 pages. He would read it in one sitting, in one day. That's ridiculous. I apologize for the glitching. It's because I'm flashing all these books and it somehow screws it all up. And there we go. We're back now. It's got to like sync up. But yeah, I've read the 3. But, and I have a couple others. I have the abridged version of the Robert V. I think it's Ramini. He's since passed. But there's an abridged version. It's like 400 pages. And I was like, let's see what the real book is. Oh, it's much bigger. So, yeah. Jackson, he's just a very interesting guy to me. Okay. Well, what's your opinion? Tell me what you like, what you don't like. Can you do a cartwheel? These are things that we need to know in the comment section. So, I'll leave it there. And until next time, have a good day, have a good night. If I can figure out the button to end it. All right, take 2. Hey! Have a good day, have a good night.